Hey everyone, welcome back to Citywide Blackout, your home for music, movies, and more. I'm your host, Max Bowen. In this episode, I'm talking with author Rex Hurst for his new book, What Hell May Come, available June 12th through Crystal Lake Publishing, and based on the Satanic Panic of the 1980s. Now, this is something that Rex was already familiar with through reading a lot of books on the subject, and in his story, there actually is a worldwide satanic cult. And the main character, Jon St. finds out that his parents are part of that cult. And my next guest, well, he's written a book that basically takes you straight to hell in more ways than one. I'm joined by author Rex Hurst. His new book, What Hell May Come, will be available on June 12th through the wonderful folks at Crystal Lake Publishing, the best name for a publishing company. Rex, welcome to the show. It's awesome talking to you.
Yeah, same here. Thank you very much.
So this book, reading into the background about it, basically is based on the Satanic Panic, which, if that's not a band name, it probably should be.
That's what I was thinking, too. I said, what
been.
Great death metal name. And there isn't one. And
no.
I don't understand why.
Either like a death metal band or like a grungy punk band, something like that. But come on, it just flows. Satanic Panic.
Well, that was the original name of the book, was Satanic Panic. The problem is, the beginning of last year, a bad movie came out with that same title.
Damn.
And I remember, we had everything together, and then this movie came out, and it's not bad, it's just not great.
Yeah.
And it's totally different from what my book's about. So it's like, at the last moment, we had to change. I remember seeing the preview for it. I'm like, oh man, I got to change my novel. I got to change the name of the book.
Which is the hardest thing to do.
That was probably, that was the hardest part of the whole thing. Writing it wasn't easy. Once I got into all the background material, it all came up by itself.
Titles are so hard. And when you have one that you're like, yeah, perfect, that's what we're doing. And then you're like, well, we are on to plan B. Now, when you had to change the title, did you have some in the background? Do you have some in your back pocket?
No.
Oh, Jesus.
I went to my writing group, which meets every 2 weeks, and I live in South Carolina, so these people look at me like I'm a weirdo because they all write either Southern, nostalgic Southern things from the 1800s or Civil War recreations or cozy mysteries, and I'm bringing my horror stuff in there. I spent the whole time just because you bring in 6 pages and then read it to them. So I brought in 6 pages of titles and sat down and said, which one do you think is the best? So that's what popped out to everyone. What Hell May Come, because that's a misquote from Shakespeare.
It works too.
Exactly. That's Hamlet. The original title is What Dreams May Come.
Yep. Also a movie.
And a great book.
Yes.
Actually, the book's way better. Actually, What Dreams May Come is probably one of the most depressing movies I've ever seen in my life.
It opens with a suicide. That's about as bad as you can get.
Yeah, exactly. I know. I mean, it's tragic, and it's I don't care much for Robin Williams, a lot of his stuff, but that's one of his best works.
Oh yeah, definitely.
That and the Fisher King.
But let us talk more about Satan. This book, based on the Satanic Panic of the 1980s, when basically everyone thought that different things like D&D and heavy metal was all about bringing kids into the good old Lucifer, good old Beelzebub.
The theory at the time was that there was an underground satanic movement, an actual religion that was underground, which was silently corrupting the youth through the use of toys, cartoons, anything the kids liked at the time, especially Dungeons and Dragons. Don't forget there was a Christian alternative to Dungeons and Dragons that came out back in the day called Dragon Quest.
Ooh,
did you ever see that one?
I probably did, and I want to play it just to see how bad it is.
Well, you'd have to combat Force of Evil Bible verses. But I started reading this stuff because, I grew up and I listened to all this. And I'm sure you had heard of this stuff, too. And we all thought it was garbage. And then I'm reading it. And I'm like, not only is it garbage, it's insane garbage. I mean, there's the book Michelle Remembers, which she claimed that this hypnotist put her under hypnosis. And then she remembered a satanic ritual abuse from her childhood. in the 1960s. And you remember there started a whole wave of people all of a sudden being hypnotized and remembering they were abused as kids. Of course, in the book, if you read the book, it doesn't claim that she was abused by these Satanists as a child. She was part of an 81-day ritual called the Feast of the Beast, which literally conjured up the devil. That's in the book, and people took it seriously. And the devil came out and started speaking in rhyming couplets.
Wow. I mean, didn't know the devil was such like a showman.
Well, I'm aware of this. And I mean, I don't see how anyone could have taken that seriously. But they did. This guy made his entire career. The psychiatrist who wrote the book, Lawrence Pazder. And that started, and of course there was the case of the James Dallas Egbert III, who was the person who was he disappeared under the steam tunnels in Michigan State back in the day, and this has been parodied over and over and over again. And then he was heavily into Dungeons and Dragons. He was also a drug abuser, right? I think he was snorting cocaine, and he was mentally ill, and he was gay during a time when it was not okay to be gay. All of these factors came into him just disappearing. Because he disappeared from Michigan State in like the late 1970s, and then reappeared somewhere in like New York, and he was living as a hobo, a bum, and he killed a guy, stuff like that. This was made into a novel and then a movie called Mazes and Monsters. But the thing is, they didn't blame, the mental pressures this guy was under. They didn't blame the drug use. They blamed the fact that he was a dungeon master playing D&D for his illnesses, for all the problems. And of course, Dungeons and Dragons obviously was trying to lure people away from Christianity with their lack of gods or whatever. Did you ever see the movie Mazes and Monsters?
No, I never have.
It's on YouTube. You can watch it. It stars Tom Hanks.
Oh, okay.
As the guy who goes nuts while playing Dungeons and Dragons.
I was like, reading this about your book, and it said this reminds me a lot of what we went through at the Columbine shootings.
Yes.
And everyone was saying, "Oh, it's a responsibility of Marilyn Manson and the Insane Clown Posse and Grand Theft Auto. They're taking kids and making them do violent things they would never have done if they hadn't heard this music or played these games."
They blamed Keanu Reeves' wardrobe in The Matrix.
Oh yeah, that's right.
It is. It's very similar, only this went on even more so because the Columbine shooting actually happened.
Yes.
The thing about the Satanic Panic it was all fake. There was no Satanistic cult. So that's how they can keep going with it, because it was a boogeyman that just paid off dividends. And so I'm reading this psychotic stuff, and there's a ton of the books I have of these. And I'm starting to collect them like rare jewels now because they're... And I'm like, this is a gold mine of great stuff for a horror novel. The great thing is, and then my wife was saying to me, she was like, well, isn't this stuff, copyrighted or whatever? And I go, no, because they all claim it's true. They said all of it's true. So, I mean, how can they come, they'd have to admit they were fake.
Exactly. I almost think no one would want to like admit that they were like a part of it. Like, oh yeah, that was me. I'm just going to be quiet about this.
Well, a few of the people who have written these books have turned out to have, severe mental illnesses, schizophrenia, that sort of thing. So they're highly suggestible.
Yeah.
And they saw that this is a way to get attention. And then these people brought in, and then they were encouraged to tell their story. I'm putting that in air quotes. You can't see it. But so they came up with stuff, and they were immediately believed. Because the crazier the story, the more it was believed about by certain figures. Especially the woman, I can't remember her name. She created the group Bad, bothered about Dungeons and Dragons.
Priceless.
Book 2 called Where's Satan Taking Your Children? That is the name of the book. Oh, that's one of my particular favorites because I just looked through it and laughed just at the misconceptions. Like you remember Simon & Schuster put out a version of the Necronomicon back in the day?
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, but it was just something they made up. This is back in the 70s.
Okay.
This is just a paperback. Well, she confused that with the actual Necronomicon from H.P. Lovecraft, who she thought was an actual book.
Jeez.
Stuff like that. That's a great book, too, of the Necronomicon. There was don't forget, at the end of the 70s, in the mid-70s and in the end, there was a real push for a different kind of occultism. That's when the sort of rise of that literature came.
Mm-hmm.
We call it New Age today, but it all started off as the same sort of jumble. They just got rid of some of the other religious stuff. Because I remember I would go into I can't remember, one of the local bookstores, and there'd be a copy of the Satanic Bible that you could buy in the religion section by Anton LaVey. I mean, it was out in the open. Yeah, we bought it, and we'd go out and get drunk and say a few things. I mean, that's what Satanism really meant back in the day. You listen to some heavy metal, you get drunk out in the middle of nowhere, have a garbage can fire, and read from the Satanic Bible and think you're being rebellious.
Yeah. Even though you've just like forked over like however much for the book, which is probably maybe some large ass corporation.
Yeah, it was. I mean,
Rebels.
You're right, I know, but you're a dumb kid. You don't know.
Exactly.
And they're not the ones telling you not to do stuff. You give money to the people who tell you to do stuff. Yeah, go out, have fun.
This is almost like a modern day witch trial, in that there was just nothing to it. There was no actual witches. There's no actual Satanists. It's just people think that this stuff is all happening.
Well, yeah, but people really suffered from it. The West Memphis Three, if you remember that from the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Where these three kids who were like in the heavy metal music got arrested, and I think they were locked up. They were given a life sentence for the death of two kids. And as it turned out, I think they were released eventually, but only after a documentary came out. But they were the primary evidence against them was they liked listening to heavy metal music.
Jesus.
Yeah, I know. And then and they arranged all the. I mean, look up the more detail. I have a friend who thinks that they were actually guilty, but the evidence is really circumstantial. And then there was a whole series of people in California. These were daycare workers who were getting arrested by people who claimed that they were part of the prosecution claimed they were part of an underground satanic cult who had set up shop in a series of daycare things who were sexually molesting children and bringing them into being part of the satanic cult and initiating them. They used the repressed memory thing. Apparently, they're sexually molesting the kids, then somehow repressing the memory so it would come out years later and the kids would be joined part of the cult, like some sort of Cold War, Manchurian Candidate thing. People went to jail for this.
Yeah,
at least 30 people went to jail. All their convictions were eventually overturned, but they lost a lot. I mean, years of their life. Only one guy was still found guilty because he actually was a sexual predator. It started at hysteria there. There was another TV movie made at the time in the 1990s. I can't remember what it's called, but I know it starred Babe Newworth, Lilith from Cheers. Janet Reno made part of her career off of those convictions.
How much research did you do for this book? I mean, it sounds like you kind of knew a lot of it was before you even wrote this thing.
Well, it kind of wrote itself.
Yeah.
It's set in my hometown. Now, all of the deaths in there are based on actual cases that occurred that people claimed had some sort of satanic influence.
Okay.
One of the places in there was called Snakeland, which was supposed to have satanic, cults, and it was just, I guess, part of a satanic cult, which I'd been there. I'd been there at the time, and I know the fact that it was just a bunch of idiots sitting around getting drunk, smoking pot and reading from the Satanic Bible. I mean, eventually we all grew up. We got rid of the Satanic Bible and we just kept the alcohol and weed and got into grunge. So we got rid of the heavy metal stuff. But yeah, for some reason, there was a Geraldo Rivera. Is that how you say his name?
Rivera.
A special on Satanism in the 1980s, and that helped fuel the fire. But part of that was based on some of the events that go on in this book. And specifically the place called Snakeland, which was, totally blown up. It was supposed to take place. The people that one of the murders, they went out, supposedly played Dungeons and Dragons, read for the Satanic Bible, and then killed one of the girls. That's all bull. Okay, I'm telling you right now. She died, but she died of a drug overdose.
Okay.
But the story reported in the papers is something completely different at first. Part of it is I grew up with it, and the second part is I thought, no one talks about this anymore. No one remembers it. I mean, these are all. I had to do some research, look into this, but then I bought the books and I read them, and they're all still. Some of them are still in print, but all of them you can get on Amazon. And I said, I mean, this is just a gold mine. So I just started. I started from the beginning, and I looked, and I said, what would the world actually look like if all of this was true? And that's where the book is. All of this satanic conspiracy were true. What would the world actually look like?
And then we meet Jon St.
Jon St.
Jesus, man, that kid. Oh my God. I kind of like, I'm reading the book and I'm reading what he's going through. I'm thinking, man, I hope his parents get exactly what they have coming, because this kid deserves a happy ending. But it does not start off that way. He's massively abused, massively neglected by his parents. His only real joy is to play actually D&D. And that's when he learns his parents are actually part of a cult. And it's not just a small little thing. It's actually like this huge national reach cult. And the more he gets into it, the more he and his friends kind of learn about actually summoning demons, which I'm sure just works out perfectly well for everyone.
Now that game that they play called Dark Dungeons is based on one of those. Do you remember those Chick tracks by Jack Trick? They were little rectangular comic books.
I think so, yeah.
And they were little rectangular comic books that were supposed to teach you how to become closer to Jesus. But they were incredibly paranoid as they went on. Basically, if you weren't part of his specific fundamentalist, dogmatic version of Christianity, you were going to hell. And so each one of these you can still get these online. They're about 10 cents a piece. Each one is to teach you a different lesson, but they're incredibly paranoid and they're evil. I mean, you look at them and evil because, the Antichrist is the Pope. And there was one he did specifically about role-playing games and Dungeons and Dragons, and that's called Dark Dungeons. That one is more difficult to get. I only have one copy of it left. Again, I collected all these things, and I collected all these great these paranoid Christian comic books that talked about massive global conspiracies.
John, what is he in the story? Is he like, the good guy, the bad guy, something like in between? What's his kind of role in this?
He's sort of like I would have been under that circumstances at that time. He's got to navigate the world and choose it for himself. The one thing is about the cult that I adapted part of it from the Satanic Bible. It is a cult of choice, and there's standing on your own 2 feet. So he has to make that decision one way or the other. And part of it deals with the tarot. If you'll remember the use of the devil card in there. The devil. It represents freedom, and it also represents being chained by material possessions. And that's what we see John make that decision at the very end.
I'm not that far into the book, folks. I haven't actually read the entire thing, but I'm loving what I've seen so far here. This is such a great.
How far are you?
I'm like 4 or 5 chapters in. And just
got Mexico yet.
Yeah. Oh, geez. What happens in Mexico? Oh, geez.
Well, the people that he deals with that they deal with in Mexico was an actual drug dealer.
Oh,
he was a satanic drug dealer, part of the Palo Mayombe group.
Okay,
where they create an Ngaga, and they again their religion is very odd. It comes from old West African juju cult religions. He was a real person. He was a drug dealer, and he believed in the spiritual forces, and that he had this altar essentially, which was filled with what we would call trash. To them, it was bits of the earth that would make them stronger. So this guy would take real human beings and because he wanted to be smarter. So he had this graduate student kidnapped and chopped off his head and put it in the Ngaga in order to make himself to steal his special forces and make himself. Yeah, this is real. In fact, you can see. This all happened in the 1980s.
It was like one thing that kind of just got that whole ball rolling.
The earliest I can see is a book called The Satan Seller by Michael Warkey. Now, he claimed that in the 1960s he was part of this. He was head of this satanic cult, and that he had like 50,000 followers around him and all this stuff. And as it turns out, he eventually gave it all up, and he was a Christian comic in the 1980s. And you can see his stuff on YouTube, and it's stolen jokes, basically stolen one-liner jokes like Henny Youngman and stuff. And then he preaches about Jesus. So that's the first real instance I can see of it. I think part of it was there was a certain permissiveness that came along in the 1970s that people rebelled against. If you'll notice, movies changed.
Yeah.
movies changed. TV shows started talking about more serious stuff, like with All in the Family. And you remember the spinoff Maude? She has an abortion in that. And, you can't, and that day one came out in 1978, 1968, they were going to talk about abortion. Are you kidding me? So there was a general permissiveness. And then because of that permissiveness and the idea that the younger generation, well, I tried drinking when I was a kid. I tried smoking pot when I was a kid. So the younger generation is going to do that too. While the older folks who grew up who didn't do that saw this permissiveness happening in the schools. And that's when it all started to blow back a little. If two people really represented it, the first one would be Phyllis Schlafly. There's a Hulu series called Miss America based on her now. She represented the conservative women's approach, and the other one would be Ronald Reagan, because Ronald Reagan brought all of the what are they called, the mega churches and the pastors. You remember that was the time of the televangelists really started to rise as well. He brought them all together under the Republican umbrella. Before that, they wouldn't have done that, but he did. He saw a powerful voting base. So he brought them in and started to pass legislation along those lines to protect children, of course.
Of course.
What about the children? What about the children? So that's where the blowback came. And then they found that it was easier to attack an invisible target than a real one. I mean, this is the one that kept on giving because they couldn't fight back.
Yep.
They wouldn't exist. And the other things they attacked were all in the beginning, in their infancies. Dungeons and Dragons, that started to really blow up, but that wasn't anywhere near what it eventually would become, especially in the late 80s and 90s in role-playing games. Those were still remember, a lot of times they're still being sold in hobby stores where you bought model train and airplane glue and all that stuff.
I remember those days.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there wasn't a gaming store like there are now. Even then, video games were attacked. Donkey Kong, right? Mesmerizing children. Okay, you were saying.
I was going to ask you about the world of this book. Now, as you mentioned, this is a world where the notion of the satanic cult is actually true. It's actually a real thing. What kind of world building did you have to do to create all this?
The research. I had to read all these books, and the basic ideas behind them are put into the philosophy and the world of that novel. So you don't have to read the book.
Oh, that's good. You had to go through that, huh?
Right. But don't forget, it nominally looks like our world, except beneath the surface, because that's where they always claim the satanic ritual abuse occurred, was beneath the surface. So if you scratch a little thing here, a little thing there, and you'll see behind all the ills of the world is this cult, this group trying to manipulate things in order to gain power for themselves. And they don't want control, because they don't need control. It's about money. Because once they have enough money, they can do whatever they want. Then the main purpose of this, of course, is, well, I don't want to give it away, but if you remember their older sister that they indulge, and they let her drop out of school, and they give her drugs, and they let her have sex with whatever she wants. They are creating what they call an imperfect vessel. Aleister Crowley called it the Scarlet Woman, in order to create a dark messiah to bring into the world, which is part of their ultimate goal. I think I just gave away part of the book.
I think we kind of guessed as where it was going.
Okay, good.
That's some messed up parents too. John's mom and dad, holy crap, they're awful. They are just the worst people in the world. They
are, but they live in a completely different philosophy. They were raised for that. They were raised I took the satanic philosophy put forward by Anton LaVey in the Satanic Bible. I took it to the extreme. Then I added a little de Sadian philosophy, from the Marquis de Sade. And that's how I built it. It's about power. It's about control. It's about indulging yourself. Their religion is not so much a religion as in the worship of creatures from beyond. The purpose is to control those creatures from beyond. Catharism was like that too, where they were trying to summon in angels and command them. The Kabbalah is like that as well. It's about understanding the things from beyond, but not worshiping them or asking them, but taking them in and turning them to your own will. And John indulges in that a little bit too.
Oh, goody.
Yeah. Well, it's easy. It's easy to be corrupted, and that's part of Jon's problem. Is how much will he be corrupted? Because he can't not be corrupted because he literally has no support system.
He does seem like a decent kid, or at least he's trying to be. At least he's like, well, I mean, he's not his family, so it's a low bar. But yeah, he definitely seems like the kind of that could go kind of either way. He could go, good or bad, depending on kind of which way he's pushed.
And it's a horror novel. You're not always going to, I'm not going to give away the ending, but you're not always going to get the best ending, which is why I like the horror genre more than anything.
Mm-hmm. Now, was this your first time writing horror?
No, this is my second one.
Cool.
My first one was called The Foot Doctor Letters, about a serial killer. The main character is the serial killer. So he wrote, I read a whole bunch. Well, see, what happened was a friend of mine died, and he left me all of his, he collected true crime serial killer books. And I read them. And again, I'm like, no one ever does serial killers correctly. No one does them right, because most serial killers most of their crimes are sexual crimes. They do it because the sex instinct inside of them has been twisted around somehow to where this is the only way they can get off is by, rape, violence, and murder. So I wrote that book from that perspective. And it's him at his trial writing letters to people about basically writing his memoirs. I think a lot of people thought that was a little too real.
Well, so is this book too. I mean, like one of the things about it is you do a great job painting the picture. I mean, I am seeing Jon. I am seeing his sisters. I'm seeing his parents. Like I kind of picture his dad. I don't know if this is accurate, but I kind of picture his dad. Is this like towering dude, maybe like 6'5", kind of big, with a full like beard, mustache, very very like close like cropped hair, very like horror movie villain type of guy.
Well, I learned long ago that when you're writing horror, when you're writing a character, it's actually best not to describe them too much, because that allows the reader to come in and fill in. Though the reader will fill in all the details, and they will allow. And if the less detail you give, except what's necessary, if you want your characters tall, you got to say they're tall, but you don't have to go into that much. The reader themselves will fill in those details, and they'll be sucked into the story a lot easier.
Definitely. Hey, it worked for me. I was just drawn right in. Now, you mentioned earlier that the religion isn't necessarily about like worshiping a devil. It's more about just like living whatever you want to do. Like total indulgence.
It's a philosophy as much as a religion.
Mm-hmm. And that his parents, Jon's parents, were kind of raised with that. Does that make them victims, or does it make them villains?
Okay, well, again, this is something that was brought up in the 80s, too. I remember Oprah constantly talking about this, and she'd bring in a person who was sexually abused by her father, and their father would come in and talk about how he was sexually abused by his father, and he was a real victim as well. How much does personal responsibility come into it? Two wrongs don't make a right. But that's all I can say. That's all I can say. I mean, something bad happened to you does not give you license to say, well, it's my turn to do it to someone else now.
Exactly. But I think the other argument could be made that they never really had a chance. Did they ever have an opportunity to get another perspective, especially if this was just like crammed like down their throats? But that's, they're
not living on an island by themselves with no contact with the outside world. You always have a choice. I mean, if you literally are like, Tom Hanks in Castaway, all right, you always have a choice. Maybe not good ones, but I think after a certain amount of time, especially when you have a certain amount of capital maybe raised up, you have a choice in how you want to behave and how you want to live. Mm-hmm. To either control, impulses or not hurt other people just because that's what's happened to you. I think the choice, when you take that one step between being abused and then becoming the abuser, unless you're like 6 or 5 or just a little kid. But when you're an adult, you know right from wrong. The Catholic Church said the age of reason was 7. By the time you're 7 years old, you should be able to really differentiate between right and wrong.
All right, I want to ask about working at Crystal Lake Publishing. How did you find these guys, and what's it been like working with them?
Well, it's been great, really. They made some suggestions that I wouldn't even thought about in the book. They put together. Not a lot of the book had to be changed, but what they did want changed, I could totally see. I mean, I could see in retrospect. The problem is, I can never tell if my writing's any good or not because I'm too close to it. There's been times when I've said, wow, this is the most brilliant piece of thing I've ever put together. And I take it and I say, This is shit. What's the matter with you? Again, for anyone who's to be a writer, you got to learn to take that.
Oh yes,
You got to learn to take that. You got to get that thin skin going. I mean, thick skin going.
Yeah, because if it's such a writing group that calls it crap, it's going to be the reviewers.
Right. Exactly. So they're doing you a favor in the long run. Or the worst part is, you show it to friends who don't want to be rude to you.
Oh God.
So they tell you it's good, and then you think, oh, I'm putting together something great here, and it's garbage. So they're not doing it. You got to find those people that you trust to tell you that what you write is terrible.
I was just even like putting it up on sites like WordPad or Fiction Press or Inkit, because you'll get complete strangers who will totally review your stuff for you, and those will be, I think, the most honest, because they have like no stake in your happiness.
Maybe, but I'm old school. I prefer the face-to-face approach.
Sure.
The other thing is, I don't trust the opinions of total strangers. It's got to be someone I know that they're going to tell me the truth because they honestly believe it, not because they're who has enough skill that I would value their opinion. Plenty of people can come in and say this is terrible, this is great, but what else do they consider? What else do they consider to be great or terrible? Am I making sense there?
You do, yeah, definitely. What's the best advice that your writing group has ever given you?
Actually, the first page, the first chapter of the book, they told me to throw out.
Really?
Yeah. The very first chapter, I totally rewrote it. I mean, that's what you got to do anyway, because you're still finding your feet. And every time I've written a book, I have to go back and totally rewrite the beginning because it's different. But yeah. They said, this isn't a good start. This is not a good start to the character.
What was the original start? I'm really curious now.
He's coming home and he's just getting into an argument with his mother. It's sort of similar, but they said you have to show, and this is something that's not done a lot. It's called Save the Cat. And this used to be done a lot back in the day, but not anymore. You have to show the main character has an altruistic streak in them, that they're willing to do something to help other people. You never see in the beginning of the 80s, you'll see the movies will begin with a montage, and then you see the main character, and he buys like a hot dog, and then he sees a homeless person, and he gives it to the homeless person. And that has nothing to do with the plot. It just shows you that they have a kind heart. And that gets you on that character's side, which is why I have him opening up with trying to save the life of the squirrel. It shows you that he is a kind person. And that brings it in immediately. It also shows you what terrible circumstances he lives in.
Yes. Oh, jeez. Yeah, man. When I first read that, I thought, wait, I couldn't read that right. Then I read it again. I thought, oh man, and this is his mom. And it's like, Jesus, she's awful. Yeah. June 12th is the official release date for the book, but of course, all the normal ways you would do this are kind of on hold. You can't do the conventions, you can't do the expos, you can't even do like a release party. So, do you have anything planned for this? Maybe like a virtual party?
Yeah, we're trying to put together a virtual party.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the best I can do when I'm just again, I'm doing a lot of interviews, these sort of things, and sending out a lot of free copies to people for reviews, because everything's canceled, everything's on hold, and you don't know how it's going to start up again or when it's going to start up again. Exactly.
Have you gotten any reviews yet?
Not yet, no. This is just the beginning of it. You're my first interview about it.
Oh, cool. Very cool. Yeah. Good to be the first one. Do you worry how people are going to respond to it, especially where this will be more official than like a Facebook comment or opinion from the writing group?
I don't know. From what I found, people either love my books or they hate them. I've always gotten a flurry of either 1 stars or 5 stars. And this is, they talked to me at Crystal Lake and they said, they think this would be a great underground classic, meaning it's not that mainstream, but it's going to be, kind of like how Naked Lunch is an underground classic. Mm-hmm. It's around forever, and it sucks. Or Last Exit to Brooklyn, something like that. They can't be. They're controversial hits if it's a hit. Again, I can't judge myself, and it's really up to everyone else. It's up to everyone else in the world to pass judgment at this point. It's out of my hands. Mm-hmm. Thank God, because you write a book and then you spend twice as long going over it and fixing everything and then changing it and then putting it in for review and then changing what they want. And it's great. It's what I've always wanted to do. But again, it's an exhaustive process at times. And I'm happy to move on to a new project.
And what is next for you?
I'm writing a book called The House of Whispering Hate. Well, actually, I have two books. One I finished. I'm still working on. The one I'm working on now is called The House of Whispering Hate. And it's set in a prison where an experiment is occurring in a prison where a woman who has psychic abilities is able to see through time when a certain audio pitch is implanted in her ear. And so they discovered that not only can she see through time, she can literally interact with what's going on inside the prison. And then they'll soon find this is a two-way street. So I'm researching a lot about old-time prisons. And it's called the House of Whispering Hate because back in the day in the conjugate system, prisoners weren't allowed to talk to each other. They were locked up in their cells for 23 hours a day. And they would only communicate with each other by whispering back and forth.
I love that title. That title is awesome.
Well, the other book that I'm still trying to write, it's my first book, really, that when I became serious about trying to really write is called Sunday Morning at the Peak of Hell. It's my journey through hell. And it's me. It's basically me redoing the Inferno for the modern age, where Satan has been overthrown. Humans are now in charge of hell. And things continue on the same. And I'm going through because the friend I mentioned before died, and I'm going through hell trying to make sure that he's not in hell.
Oh, so wow.
It's a very personal book for me.
Yeah.
Why it's taken me so long to write it.
Do you think that when this one is done, like when it's time to ship it off to the publisher, be like a difficult thing where it's no longer in your hands?
Oh yeah. Well, that's part of it. It's empty. It's like, the birds have to leave the nest. Right? The child has to leave the home. You just have to accept it. And then, either be accepted by the world or rejected or ignored. You just have to keep punching through and just say, if people don't like this book, then you say, well, the next one will be better.
There you go. Well, Rex, man, this has been a lot of fun. I've loved talking to you, and I cannot wait to read more of this book. Absolutely amazing stuff.
Yeah, let me know what you think.
You got it, man. You got it. Where do folks go to learn more about you and to get your books?
www.rexhurst.com. Actually, that's old-fashioned, isn't it? Just rexhurst.com.
That's right. HURST.com. You can see all of his books, all of his titles. Check them all out, and definitely get on June 12th, What Hell May Come, available through Crystal Lake Publishing. Rex, thank you again, man. Great book.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Hey, what's up? This your girl, Molly McCoy, and you're listening to Citywide Blackout, your home for the best in music, movies, and a whole lot more.
All right, that brings the episode to a close. Big thanks to Rex for joining me. You can follow the show on Facebook under Citywide Blackout, Twitter and Instagram under Citywide Max, and citywidblackout.blogspot.com. Listen to the show on Podbean, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, and every Saturday at 10 p.m. on Boston Free Radio. As always, keep those ears open.